always love to hear from you. Send us your views, comments, and videos with your name and town to the One Africa TV's WhatsApp on 081-200-6659 or send an SMS to 555. One Africa TV. It just gets better.
Now, keeping all of these things in mind, let's look at this final paragraph. And it's a very long paragraph, I'm sorry, but I just want to show you as many things as I can so that you understand the sort of thing you need to do when you do an analysis or a comparison of two poems. So, both, I'm showing now that I'm referring to Jack and the Beanstalk and the Magic Seeds, because I've mentioned them now already in two separate paragraphs. Both Jack and the Beanstalk Part 2 and the Magic Seeds play on themes found in fairy tales and nursery rhymes. So this is something they have in common. This is a similarity, isn't it? They draw attention to the magic of nature, creating a mood of awe and wonder. And this is quite a common theme or mood you'll find in children's writing, something of awe and wonder. The world is a wonderful place. To an extent, okay, because children are innocent, and so the new ideas they encounter can be quite magical in nature to them. However, and here we have a contrast, however, the story in the Magic Seeds is slightly more developed as it recounts a series of processes from which the magical little white bird is finally produced. So, note my use of single quote marks to show that I am using titles of poems, and I do it every single time I mention the poem. There is a quote mark around the poem's title, okay? And then, little white bird is in double quote marks because I've taken the phrase directly out of the Magic Seeds poem. I'm showing that I'm quoting, all right? So you can do that. You don't have to. If you use single quote marks, your marker will know that you're quoting. But it's better to be precise if you can. Okay, so it's slightly more developed as it recounts a series of processes from which the magical little white bird is finally produced. The poet, now I'm referring to the poet, not the poem, the person who wrote the poem. The poet also makes use of rhyming couplets. Rhyming couplets, okay? So remember we talked about this last week. When two lines rhyme, weed and seed at the end of the line, then they are known as a rhyming couplet. So the poet also makes use of rhyming couplets. And what does this do? If you read the poem, you'll see it makes it quite playful. Adding a playful rhythm to the poem and mimicking, copying this characteristic found in nursery rhymes. So a lot of nursery rhymes do that rhyme, they play with rhyme in order to create a certain playful rhythm. And it makes you memorize the nursery rhyme and makes it stand out. And in order for those words to rhyme at the end, sometimes ideas are turned upside down just to fit in that rhyme scheme, and that's what makes them playful and fun. Okay. So, there is also here, we've got some similarity. There's also repetition of the word, okay, no, so here I'm just talking about there is also, in terms of the poem itself, the Magic Seeds poem, within it, there's also repetition of the word and at the start of lines 2, 4, 6, 7, and 8, and being very, very specific here, which reflects the growth described in the poem. And this grew, and that grew, and then that grew, and then that grew. If you look at the poem, you'll see that and is repeated at the beginning of some lines. And that mirrors that growth. Now, the story in Jack and the Beanstalk is simpler, although the focus is also on growth. So we have a similarity between Jack and the Beanstalk and the Magic Seeds. There is a focus on growth, even though one is simpler than the other. Similarly, the idea of growth is highlighted through repetition. Here in the opening line of the word grew, remember that first line? Grew and grew and grew and grew, emphasizing growth. The focus of this poem is on its shape. as it moves horizontally. This is horizontally. That's vertically. This is horizontally. So we start out with that long line, remember that horizontal line, which could represent the ground that the seed is buried in, right? So the focus of the poem is on its shape as it moves horizontally. Then downwards, remember it came from huge and it goes down. And then finally upwards, mirroring the growth of the beanstalk itself. Unlike in the magic seeds, there is no rhyme scheme. Okay, so if we go back, do you see any words that rhyme whatsoever? There's not a single one, right? There's not a single word that rhymes. Okay, and so that is how it is very different to the first one that really plays on rhymes. Right, so unlike in the magic seeds, there is no rhyme scheme, but the spacing of the words and the capitalization of huge and beanstalk, and this could have actually had double speech marks around it. I mean, it's not wrong, but it just would have been a bit more precise. They are a playful way of reflecting the growth and magic that Jack encounters throughout the fairy tale. Okay. So, let's go and have a look here. Can you see how huge and beanstalk stand out because they are capitalized? And there's a bit of a space in a way. And this adds to that shape of that horizontal growth, the plant growing, then Jack climbing up it. Okay, so do you see how you can read much more meaning into a poem once you start looking at it in detail? And that's exactly what you should do when you get any extract that's put in front of you. Break it down into its basic concepts to build up a bigger picture of what's going on. And here it's a mood of awe and wonder at the magic of nature. Nature is magical, the way that it can just produce things, produce food to sustain life, right? So keep all of these things in mind. When you look at a poem, you're looking at the specifics, and then you are building up a bigger picture. Okay, so for those of you who would like a copy of these notes, please remember to send me a message in the web chat system, not here in Zoom, okay, in the web chat system, and I will send these on to you. And if you did miss last week's lesson, then just ask me for a copy of that too, although like I said, the poems are in your student book.
Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's live lesson. Today, we're going to be talking about articles, news articles, that sort of thing, because you have a few assignments that are about writing articles in your progress tests and your exams. You could even be asked to write articles, so you need to know quite a bit about them to make sure you get as many marks as possible. We want you to get all the marks that you can. So let's have a look here and see what we are told. There we go. How to write an article explained. Right, first of all, what on earth is an article? Okay, a news article objectively and accurately presents the facts of a situation. Okay, you can't make them up. It's got to be the facts. Note that news involves events that are not quite normal. That's kind of obviously. So news reporting, therefore, is responsible for informing the public about an event and its impact, just like the coronavirus is doing all over the world. News articles generally present the most important information first, with supporting details presented later, usually in declining order of importance. So that means you're starting with the most important stuff first. To ensure that all important information is included in a news story, you need to answer the usual questions, the 5 W's and an H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. A news article that answers all these questions should have all the relevant information. Okay, so it's relevant information you're after, not any other little side details that are not important in the least. Right, now the next important thing with a news article is who am I writing for? Yes, we know it's the examiner or whoever, but who is the audience for this report that you're writing? Because that can change the whole tone, the whole mood, the whole vocabulary of what you're going to write. But generally, this is usually specified in the question. And usually, they ask you to write an article for a school magazine. So in other words, it's for your contemporaries, your peer group, that sort of thing. So when you write, you must keep in mind that you need to write to that particular audience. So your language, tone, and vocabulary should reflect that. Okay? You're not writing to a bunch of businessmen. You'd have to use totally different language then, and all their kind of idioms, business idioms. But if it's a school magazine, you know what you would like to read and what your contemporaries would like to read. Now, some people find a problem by how do you introduce the topic? What do you say? Where do you put it? You can really start off by stating the topic, why it's important, or why it is a problem. Because it's generally going to be problems or bad news we're talking about, hardly ever good news. Yeah. And then what about the body paragraphs? You can write down 3 points, remembering your rule of 3, and develop your body paragraphs based on these points. You will most probably be given these points in your question paper, so you can just use them. So usually your assignment of any progress test or exam paper will give you some points to work on. So you can use them, or if you've got some other idea, you can use that by the same token. So it's up to your own creativity and imagination here. Right, then some people are worried about how do I conclude an article, right? All you need to do is sum up your points and give your final opinion. Then perhaps have a rhetorical question or future prediction to keep your audience interested in that topic. Okay, so either of those things, summing up what it was all about, maybe a rhetorical question for your audience to think about, or maybe a future prediction. In 20 years' time, do you think the story will still be the same? Right. Now here is the crux of the matter here. What you need to know is the format of an article. Because if you just write a load of words, it just looks like an assignment. You're not being asked to write an assignment or an essay or whatever. They're asking you to write an article. So you must know the format of an article before you can start writing it. Okay? What does an article usually have? It usually has a heading. If it doesn't have a heading, how on earth are people going to find it? And how do they know they're interested if you can't put a decent heading? Okay. Under the heading, there's usually a little byline, which means who wrote it, by John Smith. And then you have an other important thing, which is a stand first. Now, a stand first is basically one sentence that sums up what your whole article is going to be about. So that is a very important thing, to have a stand first. In some newspapers and stuff, you'll see they do it in bold print. In others, it's a bit larger font than the article. That's to make it stand out and for people to look at it and see if they're going to enjoy reading it or not. Then you'll have a few middle paragraphs, which are going to be the points perhaps that you're given. Okay, and they're not going to be long paragraphs because they've got to have a subtitle and maybe 3 sentences max. Final paragraph to conclude what you said. Inside the article, you'll perhaps have a mixture of direct and reported speech, because you might speak to some people directly, Others might want to don't want their names or anything mentioned. So you will have some reported speech. And of course you may have an image, and every image must have a caption. In other words, a little description of what it is. And usually the caption for an image is written in much smaller print. Okay? And it's got to be a good description. Okay? And not long either. Now, when you're doing your article, you're going to need details. You'll need people's full names, ages, their hometown, and their opinion or comments on the matter in hand. And that's where you'll use a mixture of direct and reported speech. Direct is better because it's more interesting, more lively. Reported's not quite so interesting. And of course, with all your paragraphs, subparagraphs, etc., you're going to need connectives. Okay? Words that show how a paragraph links to the one before. You'll just use words like however, additionally, in fact, secondly, all these kind of things. Right. An online news report is just almost the same as a news report, but let's look at this. Remember, a caption explains the picture, as we just said. The stand first offers a factual summary of the news stories, i.e. it's a short summary of the news story written as a single sentence. A stand first cannot be longer than that. So keep that in mind. And as we said, it's often in bold or larger font to make it stand out. Right, middle paragraphs give more information. So they each focus on a different part of the story or a different person's experiences or view. These must be both explained and commented on by the people involved. So as a reporter or journalist, you have to have all these details correct. If not, your newspaper could be sued, and of course you would be fired, be out of work, and nobody would touch you with a barge pole. It means you don't pay attention to detail. Writers of news reports choose a variety of sentence types to express different types of information and keep their readers engaged and interested. You cannot keep writing long sentences, compound sentences. You have to vary it up. Have a short sentence, a complex sentence, then a compound sentence with more explanation perhaps. So you must not be boring and keep it all the same. People won't read it. Right, direct or reported speech tells readers what the people involved say if it's direct, or said if it was reported. I think we looked at direct and reported speech last week. And the last or final paragraph brings things to a conclusion. Okay. So, even as you go further up in your schooling, if you're going from F1 to F2 to IG, you really need to know the format of every type of thing you're going to write about. Because in those exams up there, up high in a couple of years' time, they'll be telling you to write articles, write business letters, etc., write a blog, and you have to know the format. So learn this format so that you know it for future reference. This is a bit of a silly one. Do I need a plan to write a news report? Of course you do. You need a plan for every piece of writing if you want it to be decent, because otherwise your article will not be logical. Remember to gather all your vocabulary together before you begin. You've seen what a plan looks like a spidery diagram kind of thing. But for example, with news reports, make sure you've got a list of argumentative verbs instead of keeping on saying he said, he told her, she said, etc. And you can use words like claim, assert, insist, argue, allege, suggest, point out, maintain, these kind of things. Okay? So there's some for you for the moment. That's enough to keep you going for quite a few articles. If you're doing reasoning, you're trying to find reasons for things in that article. as a result of, owing to, through, due to, consequently, on account of, therefore, and maybe even hence, although it's a bit formal for a news report. Okay, so words like that, get them all together before you write your news report. Where can you put those in? It's going to make your work look a lot better. Okay, let's look at some tips on writing articles. First important thing is, as we said originally, identify the reader. The exam questions generally tells you who the readers are. It is usually school students or newspaper readers. Everything you write must attract the attention of these readers and engage their interest right from the first sentence. Further, think carefully about the purpose of your piece of writing. Are you writing to persuade, to advise, or to argue, or just present some information? So you need to think about those before you even start, because that will also challenge you on the words that you're going to use, the vocabulary. Okay? Right. Number 2, your headline. Your headline must be attention-grabbing. I'm not going to read something that's really boring. Okay? You want it to get people's attention. So you need to think about that and maybe even only write the headline last after you've written all your other stuff. Everywhere on the internet, you're bombarded with articles and headlines that are trying to pull the reader in, which is also known as clickbaiting. Clickbaiting. Okay? This means the writer is trying to make you open that page and read his article. Always look at the heading and first line of an article. Is it going to get anyone's attention? So if you've got something really boring there, John ate breakfast this morning, who's going to be reading that? Nobody. You know, John came down with breakfast bug. Oh, well, what happened there? Let's have a look-see. You know, so try to get that right. As I said, you don't need to write your headline first. Write down a couple of ideas for it in your plan, and then you finalize it towards the end. Your headline and your stand first. Right. This is kind of obvious. Make sure your article is interesting. It hasn't worked if people leave the page a few seconds after opening it. Okay, or the examiner falls asleep with boredom. Your article has to be engaging and entertaining. So although it's like a chore or a task to be done, you still got to inject some humor or whatever into it where you can to make it more entertaining. And you can really only do that by the words you are using and the phrases and idioms, figurative language you might use. Add humor, real life or made up examples, or even make up quotes by famous people. Okay, this is all to add interest to an article. The articles are short, so you have to be concise and put in exactly the right things. Now, here's another one. Make sure your article is easy to read. You don't want something difficult to read, because who's reading all your newspapers or looking at the internet? Maybe people who haven't done a lot of schooling, so you've got to allow for that. In other words, use subheadings to keep the text simpler and make clear, short paragraphs. Clear, short paragraphs. Write in a semi-informal, conversational style, following your plan to avoid ambiguity or repetition. Okay, as we said, you've usually got not too many words, and you want to make it a bit informal, as if you're talking to a friend kind of story. Conversational style. So that makes it easier for people to read. Right. Make sure your article or the ideas in it are organized. You need to do this at the planning stage. Think about your subheadings before even starting on the introduction, okay, or even the stand first, which tells the reader what it's all about. Then you do the body paragraphs, which have got more detail. Make sure you leave the reader wanting more at the end. Think of things you can say that might be witty, amusing, predictive, that sort of thing. Give the reader something to think about. Perhaps a rhetorical question, a question to ponder that might make them think about it for a while, or a prediction about the future. Remember, a heading makes the subject immediately clear. And if it doesn't, you've got the wrong heading and you will lose marks. Okay, it's all got to connect and make sense and be logical. Right. A rhetorical question in the first paragraph makes readers want to find out the answer. And hopefully they'll find that answer in the rest of the article. So in your introductory or first paragraph there, a rhetorical question stuck in is quite good. Because as I said, it makes people want to read on and see what the answer to that might be, although rhetorical questions obviously generally do not have any answer. Now, sometimes they say it's good to have a very short list somewhere in your article, if, depending on the context, if it's logical. Because apparently they found out that people like reading lists, maybe because it's easier than reading gigantic paragraphs, who knows? So this is not a must, it's just a little bit of if you've got space, sometimes you're stuck. If you've only got 200 words or 100 words, there's no way you've got time for this. Okay, so you've got to weigh up all these things in order to make sure that your article is going to come right. So the tips on writing articles: identify the reader, attention-grabbing headline, interesting, easy to read, organized and logical, try to making the reader want more, etc. Okay, so that's the important things to remember once you understand what the format's about. Let's look at some common errors you will find in articles. Perhaps the language is too formal and more suited to an essay. That will put people off. You're just trying to read and relax with the newspaper. There are no quotes or examples given. That's bad, because an article is more alive and interesting when people make comments. They might be inane, silly comments, but, oh, that's interesting, so-and-so said such and such. Maybe there's either not enough rhetorical questions, or maybe there's too many. Okay, there should only be one per paragraph at the most. Here's some examples. Have you ever, blah, blah, blah. What do you think about, blah, blah, blah. What would life be like if, blah, blah, blah. Will the future bring us, blah, blah, blah. Perhaps the story doesn't have enough quotes, background information, or statistical data. That would be bad if you were a journalist. Rather get too much information together and then cut it down to size. Don't ever make a statement without providing evidence as to what you're saying. You must justify or prove what you're saying. Now, here's another thing. Never use I in a news story. Why not? Reporters almost never resort to using the first person in their hard news stories, because news stories should be objective, dispassionate accounts of events, not something in which the writer injects his or her opinions. Keep yourself out of the story and save your opinions for perhaps movie reviews, editorials, blogs, journals. So in a news story, don't use the word I. Another thing, do not write long paragraphs.